Welcome back, everyone. Attorney Craig Steger here. So, for those that don't know you, I'm an attorney in Wisconsin, but I also practice in Minnesota and Iowa. And today is the daily live stream that I do. Today's topic is what happens if a woman is pregnant and, as a result of, let's say, a car accident or some other accident, her unborn fetus is either injured or dies. Is there a claim? And so I'm going to talk about that today. Before we begin, though, let's get the unpleasant stuff out of the way. This live stream is for informational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. Viewing or participating in this live stream does not create an attorney client relationship. You should always talk to an attorney that's licensed in the state where you're located and has experience in the particular um, area of law that your issue deals with. If people have general questions about the topic today or anything in general, feel free to leave them in the chat or afterwards in the comments. But if you have a particular legal question, either for me or someone else, don't leave it in the comments. It's better to reach out to an attorney. And if you want to reach out to me, just go to the description below, send me an email or a text message, whatever the case may be. Don't leave a specific legal question in the chat or the comments. So now that that's out of the way, let's talk a little bit about today's topic. So today I was working on a case, and let me tell you the story about kind of what happened. So, um, mom is pregnant with her first child. I believe she's around 8 months pregnant and is at work. And actually, this is going to be her last day at work because of her upcoming maternity leave. And so she's at work, and it's actually about this time of year. I think it's in December, and she's done with work at the end of the day, and as she's walking out to her car, she slips and falls on ice in the parking lot. And as you might imagine, she's immediately concerned since she's 8 months pregnant. And so she goes to urgent care to get checked out, and then later on to see her um, OB providers. And turns out that she sustained an injury. She actually broke her arm during the fall, but it turns out that her placenta ruptured as a result of the fall, and she began going into early labor. And her unborn child was born with a bunch of very difficult birth issues because of the abrupt nature of her delivery and the injuries that mom sustained as a result of the fall. And so the question then is, does the child or do the parents of the child have a claim for injuries? Now, as you might suspect, if you're paying attention, mom, who was working at the time, has a workers' comp claim, has a workers' compensation claim. At least this would be true in Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa. Other states may be different, especially depending on whether that state considers someone to still be covered after the end of the day on their way to their vehicle. So it's really important that people talk to a lawyer in the states that they're in to find out specifically how the workers' compensation laws might apply. But the way workers' compensation works in most states is it is considered the exclusive remedy. Well, what does that mean? It means that, generally speaking, if someone is injured at work and they have a claim against their employer, whether their employer did anything wrong or not, or just the accident could be their own fault, they have a workers' compensation claim, and typically workers' compensation benefits are more restrictive and limited than what you can recover in a normal tort claim. By tort, we mean something that's a result of someone's negligence. And so workers' comp is sort of there to protect workers and provide certain benefits if you're injured at work, whether it's your fault, your employer's fault, another employee's fault, whatever the case may be, it's there to cover you. The trade-off to that is it prevents you from bringing a claim against your employer in most situations if there actually is evidence of fault by the employer. Let's say they didn't put up safety guards, or they removed them, or didn't adequately um, teach and train employees, things like that. Those are typically limited to whatever the state allows in terms of workers' compensation. So then what happens to an employee's unborn fetus? What happens if they're injured, or worse, if they die as a result of a workplace incident? Um, can they bring a claim, and are they subject to the exclusive remedy provision of workers' compensation? Uh, in most states, no. At least in Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa, those would those claims would not be subject to workers' compensation, because obviously the unborn fetus is not employed. They're not the employee uh, of the uh, of the employer. Likewise, if a pregnant person is driving their car and they get involved in a car accident, and the accident causes injury or death to the fetus, they may have a claim against the other driver who caused the crash, as well as the mother, right? So then the question is, can you bring those claims? Because that actually varies quite a bit by state. And for purposes of this session, I'm just going to talk about the states that I practice in: Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa. I was pretty familiar with the rules in Wisconsin and Minnesota. I wasn't entirely sure Iowa, since I haven't had a birth, like a pregnancy injury or death case in Iowa. So I actually had to look it up to see what the standard is there. But in Iowa, for example, if someone is pregnant and while pregnant, an accident occurs and the fetus is injured, and the fetus is eventually born and has these injuries, there generally is a claim on behalf of the injured fetus that can be brought after birth. However, if the fetus dies and isn't born alive, they probably cannot bring a wrongful death claim, at least in Iowa. Now, if the fetus if is born and lives for a short period of time and then passes away, there may be a wrongful death claim in Iowa. But Wisconsin and Minnesota are similar in that they permit both wrongful death claims and injury claims if a fetus is injured or dies during pregnancy. The provision being that for a wrongful death claim to be viable, for a wrongful death claim to be allowed, the fetus actually has to be viable at the time of the fall, and that, as you might imagine, is very much based on the circumstances, facts, very facts specific. But at least Wisconsin and Minnesota appear to permit such a claim for wrongful death, depending on how far along the pregnancy is and how viable the fetus is at the time of the whatever it is that caused their death. So that's something to keep in mind. And typically wrongful death claims are subject to a unique set of rules in each state. Wisconsin, for example, has uh, limits on the damages you can recover for wrongful death. Each state is going to have their own rules for who can actually bring a claim for wrongful death? Is there a claim for loss of consortium, loss of relationships? Parents might have a claim. Other siblings may or may not have a claim. Wrongful death claims are very much state specific. So you have to make sure that you know what those rules are, that you talk to an attorney that knows what those rules are, can look them up for you. Um, but that's kind of how it works. Obviously, if mom is injured or killed in, let's say, a car crash or some other type of injury or accidents, whether it's work related or not, is probably going to have her claim, as well as the father may very well have a claim, um, even if there isn't a claim allowed for let's say the death of the fetus. It just depends. Um, so that's kind of how it works. I'm trying to think if I've had any other. I don't recall having any other cases involving a pregnancy related injury or death. Um, but they do happen, and they're more likely to happen in medical malpractice cases. So probably one of the more common medical malpractice cases are birth injury cases, um, for a couple of reasons. Probably the biggest reason being that because medical malpractice cases are so difficult and expensive, um, they if a child is born but they have severe birth defects such as like cerebral palsy, paralysis, those kinds of things might require a lifetime of care, and those can give rise to large economic damage awards for all of the care and medical attention, nursing care that this person might need for the rest of their life. For example, in Wisconsin, we have a cap on non-economic damages, so pain and suffering, disability, things like that, that can really limit the amount of damages that can be recovered. Whereas, let's say a birth injury case, there may be substantial lifetime of economic damages that aren't subject to a cap, which is, I think, why birth injuries tend to be the more common medical malpractice cases that are pursued now. So when I was working on this case, for example, and making a demand to the insurance company, I really couldn't find a lot of other verdicts and settlements like this. So I had to really rely a lot on medical malpractice settlements and verdicts to provide some information on what the potential um, verdict range might be. What's the settlement value of this kind of case? So this question is, there are risks of testing the baby, which you would think need both mom and dad's consent, given what you just said about they could be permanently harmed. Yeah, I don't know. I honestly am not sure what the consent rules are for that. Certainly, um, there are risks with like amniocentesis and things like that. Um, um, Birth injury cases, at least the ones that I've seen, tend to be more like um, they don't do a C-section soon enough, or there's evidence of fetal distress, and they don't, um, like I said, they don't immediately bring um, mom in for a C-section. That's probably the most common one. Probably the second most common one that I see is, and again, because it tends to be when they don't do a C-section and they try to do a natural birth, and let's say during the course of uh, delivery, the child can't be born. Sometimes they use forceps or vacuum to actually grab onto the child and improve, bring along a delivery, and injuries can happen in that case. I remember with one of our kids, our daughter, our oldest daughter. Um, it was a natural birth, and everything was going good. And all of a sudden, like during the pushing, her heart rate just kind of went down quite a bit. And so I remember they grabbed the vacuum and put it on our daughter's head and sucked on it and pulled, and she was born. It was all very. This was our second child, so it was. I had been through it before, but it was very kind of traumatic, and I apparently I got lightheaded and sat down, and they thought I was going to faint. And my wife always likes to remind me of that. But I think it was because I didn't get a chance to eat, is what I think it was. Um, yeah, I mean, C sections. I mean, I think the most common claim made for birth injuries and medical malpractice cases tends to be the decision not to do a C-section quickly enough. Um, I mean, birth is a pregnancy and birth are, despite modern advances in technology and medicine, are still very difficult and risky things, and a lot of things can happen. And no two, we've been through it 9 times. None of the births and deliveries were the same as each other, and everyone's a little different. Um, so yeah, it's unusual to see birth injury or fetal injuries in non-medical malpractice cases. It's not something that I've seen very often. I read about them. I see stories of those kinds of injuries, car accidents, and things like that. This is where I suspect every state's going to be a little different, especially on wrongful death claims. So, if as a result of a accident, car crash, or something like that, let's say the fetus dies, I suspect there may be states where there's no claim for the wrongful death of the fetus. I believe in Iowa, for example, it's because an unborn fetus does not qualify as a person under their constitution. And I'm sure there's other states that are like that. I just don't know all the states. But if an injury happens, but the fetus is later born and is a you know fully recognized person under the law at that point in time, regardless of the state, most likely, then it seems like most states are going to go ahead and allow those claims for injuries. So it's really important um, for people to be aware of that, talk to an attorney as soon as possible. There could be special rules that apply to those kinds of claims, and you want to make sure that you talk to an attorney as soon as possible about that. Yeah, that's a good point. And then we're actually dealing with, so one of the things, is you say many injuries might not get diagnosed until later in life, like brain damage, for example. There's a lack of oxygen. You probably wouldn't know immediately or soon after birth. That's exactly true. And it presents difficulties in a variety of ways because, number one, you know, if let's say, for example, I'm in my 40s, if I get into a crash and I sustain a head injury, it's a little easier to determine what kind of impacts that head injury has on me because I have a lifetime of activities and work and testing. And I don't know if I've ever had an IQ test, but there's something to measure me against if I'm injured. Whereas, you know, an unborn child or a newborn child, you don't really have anything to compare them against, right? And we don't know for sure what that child's future looks like. Some people can be born with limitations and disabilities anyway, right? Um, a lot of times, I believe what they tend to look at is what's the parent's capacity, what's been their earning capacity, what's been how have they excelled or not excelled in school and things like that. It becomes really difficult. I think you tend to rely on a lot of general statistical data, but some things can be if there is, like, let's say, a hemorrhage, an actual hemorrhage, or a brain bleed that shows up in an MRI, it's much easier to draw conclusions, long-term conclusions, based on those kinds of injuries. Depending on the for example, if during the birth the child sustains some um, kidney injury, right? Well, whether that child may eventually need dialysis or kidney replacement won't be known right away. It may not be known until they're adults, but statistically, we may be able to say the majority of people who have these kinds of injuries go on to needing, dialysis care or kidney transplant or something like that. All those kinds of things. It becomes much more difficult to accurately predict the future for children and infants who are injured than when it happens to someone who's an adult who already has, you know, years of information and data that we can use as a comparison. It's much easier to predict what kind of, like, healthcare someone might need, or are they going to be able to live independently, or are they going to need in-home care, someone that might never really advance above an eighth grade level may not be able to live completely independently, um, over the course of their life. And so, and sometimes, depending on the state, you may have to bring legal action, while the child is still young. If you have, let's say, if you have a 3-year statute of limitations, you may not be able to wait until the child gets older. Whereas some states, like Wisconsin, for example, have a specific rule that basically tolls or delays the statute of limitations until, I believe, the child turns 18. That's just in Wisconsin. I'm not entirely sure how Wisconsin and Iowa apply that, but at least in Wisconsin, we have a rule that extends the deadline, kind of for this reason. The caveat being that does not apply to medical malpractice cases. So medical malpractice cases have to be brought within 3 years, um, under either scenario, and it can be just very difficult to predict the future. Whereas if we waited until a child was 18, see how they're going to develop, see how they do in school, what their grades are, you can have a much better idea of what their adult life is going to look like, and whether they have any residual problems from, let's say, a brain injury they sustained while their mom was pregnant with them. So the discovery rule is going to apply very differently to different states. Um, it it I would not assume that it's going to, because the discovery rule tends to apply. Let's just say Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa. The discovery rule is based on when you determine, let's say, a negligent act occurred, not when you discover the extent of the injuries. It's based on whether you learn that someone has harmed you. So if you're involved in a car accident, or something bad happens during labor and delivery, that's probably going to be the triggering event. There's enough information there to know. And so that's kind of how the discovery rule is going to apply. Whether other states apply the discovery rule differently, I don't know. That's people should talk to an attorney in those states to know that. So the question is, do all claims, do the statute of limitations run upon discovery? Um, Not necessarily. Wisconsin, for example, um, at least for the medical malpractice, I believe has an outer limit of 5 years. So it's, I believe in Wisconsin, I should pull out the statute. Um, Let me look at the statute here quick. 893 point. It's in 893. 0.55. So this is just Wisconsin, but it'll be a good example. It's a very long statute because it has a whole bunch of stuff in there that they use to support a $750,000 cap on non-economic damages. So this is Wisconsin. So my camera is trying to find me. So Wisconsin, for medical malpractice cases, it's 3 years from the date of injury or 1 year from the date the injury was discovered or in the exercise of reasonable diligence should have been discovered, except that an action may not be commenced under this paragraph more than 5 years. So in that case, let's say you find out 4 years later that medical malpractice occurred and it caused injuries. Even though it's more than 3 years, there will be up to a 1 year discovery time, but it can't be more than 5 years after the original act or omission. So if you don't find out until year 6 that that malpractice occurred, even if you had no reason to believe that there had been malpractice, at least in Wisconsin, you're probably time barred. It's a pretty unfair rule, I think. I know there is an exception to that rule if the healthcare provider was hiding information or concealing it. Could be altering medical records, things like that. My camera, come on, camera, you can do it. And then I believe also if there is, if like if a foreign object gets left in, so if one of the common situations if during a surgery the surgeon leaves a sponge or an instrument inside, that might be longer as well. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, I think statutes of limitations and discovery rules are going to vary. Let me see here. There we go. Statute of limitations are going to vary greatly by state, and discovery rule is going to vary greatly by state. And I would assume that that there are going to be special rules for medical malpractice. At least in my experience in the Midwest and in these states that I practice, the lobbying groups for the hospitals and insurance companies tend to get more onerous rules in place in medical malpractice cases as compared to other, let's say, just car accidents and trip and falls and things like that. Did you say? I think you've said in prior live streams you work for lawyers or a law office. Is that right? Which states do you work in? I've got some friends that are lawyers in California. Um, I've been out there a number of times for expert depositions on cases that I have back here in the Midwest. Yeah, I haven't done criminal cases in a long, long time. I did some criminal cases when I was a younger lawyer. It was a nice it was a nice way to get some courtroom experience and get to know judges and things like that. I'm here in Wisconsin, we have a real shortage of public defenders. It's getting to be a real problem. There just isn't enough attorneys around. They don't get paid very well. Most attorneys can make more money in private practice or doing, let's say, private pay criminal defense cases as opposed to being on the public defender list. And so it's really, there's a lot of people who are incarcerated in Wisconsin, for example, because they can't get you have a right to a lawyer under the Constitution if you can't afford one. And the problem is they just can't find enough lawyers, especially in our rural areas. I don't think it's as much of a problem in the urban areas, but certainly in the rural areas, it's been a real problem to find attorneys to handle those cases. But I think public defender and criminal defense cases are really good cases for new lawyers to take on because you can get some real experience and get some trial experience, get to know judges, and earn a little money. Yeah, I would imagine here in Midwest, the majority of criminal cases are are defended by either public defenders or court appointed um, attorneys. I would say that I would imagine the vast majority of it is that way, as opposed to a private pay. But I'm not. I really don't. I don't know for sure what the statistics are. So, yeah, so that's what because I was working on that birth injury um, case, I thought that might be something people would find interesting because it's not always clear and it can vary greatly by state. And like I mentioned, if it results in death of a fetus, it can be very fact intensive as to whether a wrongful death claim can be made because you have to be able to establish viability, and that obviously can be very fact dependent, and reasonable people could probably disagree on that. So, but it's really important if you or someone is involved in a crash, could be a workplace injury accident, could be a car crash, slip and fall, trip and falls. I think it's fair to assume that um, mothers that are pregnant, especially in the later stages of pregnancy, are probably at a greater risk of trip and fall injuries, and it's good to get checked out. I remember a few years back. I don't think it was our youngest. I think it was one of our second or third youngest. We were visiting some friends um, on the 4th of July, and our friends were lighting off excuse me, fireworks. And during the course, one of the fireworks actually fell over on its side and started shooting at us, and we all kind of took off. And my wife, who was very pregnant at the time, um, fell over and scraped up her hands. And we did go to the doctor. We spent the night in the hospital just to make sure everything was okay. But fortunately, everything was okay. No one was hurt. But it's one of those precautionary things you do because you don't want to take a chance and have something going on, and then by the time you realize there's a problem, it can really be really bad for mom and for baby. So, okay, all right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this live stream up. I doubt that I'll be live streaming tomorrow since it's New Year's Eve and not on New Year's, but I should be back on Thursday. So if there's anything that people have questions about, the last one I did on last week was on adverse possession. Actually, there was a lot of questions about adverse possession, so maybe I'll do another real estate and property live stream next week. But if people have next time, but people have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them. Send me an email or a text message if you have any particular topic you'd like me to discuss. If it's something I feel like I can discuss, I'll do so. If not, I'll try to find a friend or a colleague who might be able to, let's say, do a live stream with me and answer some of those questions. So I appreciate everyone who was here in the chat, anyone who listens to this video after the fact and follows my channel. I appreciate you listening. And until next time, everyone, have a good one.